Government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome back into another podcast by George. We've got an esteemed guest. I'm just honored to have this guy back on the show. You heard him here once before. Nathan J. Robinson. He's the editor and the owner of Current Affairs magazine. The little bio that I have says that he's a British-American journalist. I think he's got dual citizenship, author. He's a columnist for The Guardian U.S., and he's the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. And last time we had him on was right before the Iowa caucuses.
The whole world's changed since then.
Nothing's changed since then, Nathan. Welcome back to a podcast by George. Yeah.
My God.
Yeah. Everything has changed. The world is upside down. And you know, the thing that caught my eye most recently, and you cover everything and you write on everything, and this Jeffrey Epstein situation, which I'd kind of like to comment on, but I kind of leave things that aren't my domain to others. I mean, I'm here in the central part of the country in the breadbasket. That's kind of separate from us. And I kind of, if I can find an angle on something, then sometimes I'll cover it. And so here comes this angle, which is very interesting. And leave it to you to bring it up, because everything, folks, particularly in this country, is money. It's all about economics. And here's what Nathan writes in the Guardian. He says, Ghislaiine Maxwell now sits in a jail cell after having been denied bail on charges of sexually trafficking minors. Maxwell is alleged to have recruited underage girls for the billionaire pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, and also to have engaged in acts of abuse herself. In one respect, the Maxwell-Epstein story is bizarre and unusual. Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's hard to think of any contemporary story, you say, that has criminal misconduct comparable to that of Epstein, who reportedly wanted to inseminate dozens of women to seed the human race with his DNA. My God, that sounds like the pharaohs of old. He
has a supervillain type quality.
Yeah, kind of something out of a comic book almost.
Yeah.
Now, it's also, however, this is the gist of what I wanted to talk about today, a story about what happens when a small class of people is allowed to behave however they like without any constraints. And as a matter of fact, that might be the overarching story.
Yeah, I think that's right. So, the Epstein story, as I say, is very weird and unusual, and people pay attention to it in part because there are a lot of famous people who were linked to Epstein. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Alan Dershowitz, Steven Pinker. Right? He moved in the most elite circles, and MIT was accepting donations from him. Harvard. So Epstein is fascinating to us because it's lurid. And of course his crimes were so outrageous. But what the angle that I take in the Guardian piece is, well, this isn't just sort of a true crime story. And there's a whole podcast, the True Anon podcast, is all about Epstein and all about these sort of economic aspects of Epstein. So this is not a novel point, but thinking about how, what allows something like the Epstein situation to develop? Because famously, he was given this deal by federal prosecutors originally, who knew that he had abused dozens and dozens of underage girls, and then they gave him a year, not even in prison, really. He was on. He got to go to his office during the day, I think.
Huge story. Now, I want to interrupt you there because I wanted to ask you about that. Acosta guy down there in Florida that cut him that slack was later quoted, I think, as saying he did that because he was told that the guy was intelligence, that he was CIA, Epstein, that is. Is that true?
I don't know. It's hard to know. I am not. It could be true. There's a lot about the life of Jeffrey Epstein that is still very, very mysterious. We still really don't quite know how he made his money. For the longest time, there were all these speculations. Where did this guy come from? Because he didn't come from money. And why did he have all these relations with all of these super, super elite people like Prince Andrew of Britain? How did this develop? So, I mean, there is a lot that is it's going to take decades, I think, to unravel. You know, there are going to be declassified documents eventually. Maybe we'll find out the truth of the Jeffrey Epstein. But I tried to focus on the thing that we do know, which is about this culture of impunity. And Ghislaiine Maxwell, who now, you know, obviously Jeffrey Epstein died, but Maxwell is now going to face charges. And she's interesting in and of herself, because she does come from money. She was born into this culture.
And people back in your part of the world know all about her background because of her father.
Right. So in Britain, she was famous long before she was famous in the United States, because her father was Robert Maxwell, who was a media baron. And Robert Maxwell, he came from poverty. Robert Maxwell was not his birth name. He built this giant sort of right-wing media empire, and then died mysteriously at sea. And then it was discovered that his empire was kind of a Madoff situation. He was pillaging his companies, and there was, in fact, it was the giant fraud, and all of his employees' pensions had been used up, and so the entire empire came crumbling down. And Ghislaiine Maxwell, his daughter, who was a socialite, who went to Oxford and sort of, again, moved in these elite circles, then came to the United States and became involved with Epstein. And there's friends and associates quoted as saying, well, Epstein was able to provide a continuation of the kind of lifestyle that she had had under her father, but that would have disappeared with the disappearance of all the money.
Well, as you write in the Guardian, you said she was nourished actually by a culture where there is no incentive not to do whatever the hell you want, regardless of its effects on the vulnerable, and that we should be careful to remember that putting Ghislaiine Maxwell in prison will not change that culture. And that's the overarching piece of this again.
Yeah.
We need to remember that. What struck me about that, again, you mentioned Trump earlier, Donald Trump. Here in the heartland, people look at that guy and they say, I cannot believe that. What in the hell is that? I'm talking about his persona.
Yes.
Well, people that I grew up with, they have no idea what that silver spoon at that level is like, how that modifies your entire essence and your perspective, and why he says and does the things that he does. That has a lot to do with it, and the same way with this Maxwell woman.
Yeah, I mean, we know what happens to spoiled children, right? We know that if you are never told no, if you never face consequences for any of the things that you do, then you become bolder and bolder, and you lose your sense of right and wrong. Donald Trump, I think one of the most telling quotes from Donald Trump is, he talked about when he was the head of the Miss Universe pageant, and I quote, this is in the piece, and he used to go into the changing rooms so he could see often teenage girls. And he admitted this to Howard Stern. He said, well, I'm the boss, so nobody can do anything because I go in and I can do what I like because I'm the boss. And that's exactly true, right? The boss gets to do what they want, because if anyone challenges them, you get fired, right? Yeah. Nobody's going to challenge. And these girls are looking for opportunities, right? The Miss Universe pageant is huge. This is the biggest thing that's happened to them in their lives so far. To confront Donald Trump and say, I'm really uncomfortable, could you leave? That requires, I mean, they didn't do that because, people are afraid. It's difficult. And I think that's what's really important. After Harvey Weinstein was arrested, I wrote an article called "The World is Full of Harvey Weinsteins," and the point that I was making there is we see these individual cases and we go, "My God, Harvey Weinstein, what a villain!" And that's true, but often on a lower level, on a smaller scale, people who are in charge of things and don't face any consequences and don't have any accountability, they get away with abusing and mistreating other people. And it's not even always sexual. Sometimes it's, sometimes it's just verbal abuse. And I think, and in fact, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaiine Maxwell were known for being, screaming kind of abusive bosses in addition to the sexual thing.
Well, and I wanted to read this next line because this really kind of gets to it, and it's one of the reasons that I love having Nathan on the show, because he's out here on the left where I'm at. He's not afraid to say that he's a socialist, and it has to do with the difference between, a more moderate socialist economic system, if you want to look at it this way, and unfettered capitalism. Right. You say eliminating the existence of financial despair and extreme wealth concentration is thus an important part of making sure there are no more Epsteins and Maxwells. And when we're talking about, and when you're writing about this extreme wealth concentration, everybody knows the formula, the 99% versus the 1%. But it's even worse than that. There's like a tenth of 1% that own virtually everything and that are really running amok. Yeah.
No, it's so true because, Jeffrey Epstein had, this giant mansion in New York City and this private island of sin, and he had his Palm Beach mansion and just so many houses and private jets and whatever. But also another important component of it is that they intentionally preyed on girls who were in dire financial straits. And they would say, and Ghislaiine Maxwell had a network of recruiters who would go out to the local mall or try to find girls who seemed like they needed money and say, would you like to come make some extra money as a masseuse for Mr. Jeffrey Epstein? So it's intentionally. Now, if there was a universal basic income, of course, and people did not need, in the United States, people weren't desperate for money, they would be less likely to take that. You'd have to offer people more in order to be willing. So, the worse off people are, the more desperate people are, and there are a lot of desperate people in the United States, the easier it is to prey on and abuse people. And the same is true in the employment context, right? So the reason a lot of bosses can be abusive is because employees need their jobs. But if you had a job guarantee, then people could tell the boss to go F themselves because they would know that being fired doesn't necessarily ruin your life. And this is one reason why the French have a very different attitude towards their bosses than Americans. The French have very little respect for their employers. They don't hesitate to speak up about things. They don't do things that they don't want to. They don't obey orders that they don't want to obey. And one reason is because they have established a culture where you're not under the threat of starving, of losing your livelihood. So that's really important.
Well, and you talk about those types of guarantees and that relationship between employer and employee. My God, that's where labor unions were. That's what they have the potential to be, but they've they've been broken here in the United States, and and where are they now? I keep waiting to. This is a perfect opportunity for labor unions, a perfect opportunity for people like Bernie Sanders, and it seems like they all go to the basement and hide. I guess that's very disappointing to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing is there has been an organized effort to crush unions. I mean, the reason that labor unions have disappeared is because employers understand that unions are a countervailing force that limits your ability to do whatever you please. And so, they hire union-busting law firms. They violate labor law by just firing anyone who tries to organize a union. They had this problem at Kickstarter. Kickstarter recently unionized, but it was a huge fight with management who tried to destroy the union. Amazon, anytime any of the warehouse workers start to try to unionize, they're gone. They're out of there because they understand that violating the law is worth it if you can keep the place from unionizing.
Yeah, I think, and a guy that you know and follow, a great journalist, Pulitzer Prize winner, Chris Hedges, What he was fired from, was it Truth Dig? Where was he fired from? Because he tried to organize or participate in a union at one of those shops. And I mean, I was just flabbergasted. That's how he lost his job, was by trying to start a union in a place that's supposedly pro-left. I mean, that just shows you how down unionism is in the United States. Well, I wanted to get to this next part again, because when we talked about Epstein and Maxwell, this is kind of the lawyers, guns, and money thing. That's the title of a song by Warren Zevon. Yeah, it makes me think of that. Another angle here was on this crazy story, this Russiagate stuff that just won't quit. Now, this was an article, this was something that you wrote actually in Current Affairs. And again, you're telling people to look at the economics of this, look at the money, and that's really what's behind this crazy story of trying to protect these United States laboratories and financial interests and their work on a virus, which, hell, it might save us all.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I've also recently written about the protection of vaccine research as proprietary, because there was this recent story about Russia trying to quote steal coronavirus vaccine research. Now, the United States government admitted that Russia wanted this so they could make their own coronavirus vaccine, which, you would think that the creation of a vaccine would be a global effort, and that we would want anyone who could possibly make a vaccine to know everything possible about how to make it. But they admitted that there were commercial interests at stake, because whichever country comes up with a vaccine first is going to be in a position to dictate terms to everyone else. And there's going to be a huge amount of money. Even though some of the firms have pledged to give out the vaccine itself for free, there's also the fact that, yes, it's free, but you can buy a place in line. So to get the first package of doses, that you pay for. So they pretend that there isn't a commercial interest here, but there actually is a huge commercial interest. Money affects absolutely everything. Money is what buys you justice. We know this. In the Epstein case, you can buy your way to better legal representation. You can buy Alan Dershowitz. Steven Pinker, the Harvard psychologist, testified at Jeffrey Epstein's trial. He was a defense witness for Jeffrey Epstein because Alan Dershowitz was his lawyer and Steven Pinker is Alan Dershowitz's friend. So you can have a world-class psychologist on your defense team with all the credibility that comes with that if you're a billionaire. And if you're not a billionaire, you don't get that. I mean, it's very, very clear the way that money governs the world and shapes the outcomes.
It's going to shape the outcome of the presidential race here in the United States. And I wanted to just touch on this because last time we had you on, because we're of a like mind on this, we wanted to talk about Joe Biden, but we ran out of time. And at the time, I was saying there were 3 candidates that were completely unelectable from the Democratic Party, and one of them was Mayor Pete, and the other one was Warren, and the other one was Biden. Those 3, I said, cannot be elected. Well, that was before the pandemic. And, it looks like Trump is well on his way maybe to beating himself. We keep trying to cane him to death in the public square. Yeah. And I'm looking at Biden. Is he going to make it through? Do you think he could be the next president?
Gosh, I hope so. I mean, I'm no Biden fan. I've written very critically about Biden, but I think that the Trump administration's coronavirus handling has just been so disastrous and deadly that I think we're all kind of pulling for Joe Biden now, even though he's barely even there. He's just another name on the ballot. He's kind of a cipher. And I think when you say that, Trump might beat himself, that is really the question. The question is not, is Joe Biden going to successfully campaign? The question is Trump in fact going to implode? And if Trump implodes and the entire American public hates him, then Joe Biden will probably win. And if Trump manages to spin this and manages to muddle his way through, then Trump might get reelected, which is horrendous. But either way, it's not going to depend on much of what Joe Biden does, because Joe Biden's made it clear that his strategy is to just lie low.
Well, there were a lot of Democratic candidates. There are a lot of people in this country that would like to be president of the United States. And like I said from the beginning, my litmus test, my starting point for analyzing candidates for president of the United States, did you vote for and did you support the Iraq War?
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a role in a war based on a lie that resulted in the deaths of as many as 1 million innocent men, women, and children who will be hunting down our grandchildren and great-grandchildren? Did you have a part in that? And Joe Biden had a major role of that. And I mean, it's the greatest condemnation, I think, and black mark on this country that you could ever have, that we may elect president of the United States, somebody that not only promoted that, but supported it and was involved in it in the early stages. And maybe if he had been vocal and stood up and voiced his opposition, there might not have been one. Because everybody forgets Joe Biden at the time was considered to be, in this country, one of the world's foremost authorities on foreign policy. Yeah. And he started that damn thing.
Oh, I know. And he also misled people about his role in it afterwards.
Yes.
He suggested that he was against it starting at the very beginning, and it's just false. I mean, he's been it's a giant mark against him. If we're picking Democratic candidates, it matters. It's probably the worst policy blunder that the United States has committed in the 21st century. So to have been involved with that is extremely shameful. And Barack Obama, in fact, in part got elected on the strength of the fact that he had opposed the war from the start. And he had given a speech that was denouncing the war. And that made people trust him, quite rightly, because it showed that he had at least some judgment. And then, of course, he picked Joe Biden as vice president. But but that was a sign of judgment. That was a point in Obama's favor. How much it will matter in this election is unclear, because coronavirus is basically the only issue on people's minds. So going back to 2003, I think would have been a huge issue in a normal election. And now we are in a totally crazy election under completely unexpected circumstances.
Well, we could talk all day because, like I say, we're of like mind on a lot of things. And I really appreciate you coming on the podcast again, Nathan. You just hit the office today. I mean, you cover everything of significance. What's top of mind? What are you going to be working on now? What's on your plate? What are we going to see coming up in current affairs and in The Guardian and every place else that you're seeing and heard?
Yeah. So today I'm spending the day writing a review of Glenn Beck's Arguing with Socialists. So I've just been, the reason I was late this morning is I was engrossed in a biography of Glenn Beck, if you can believe that.
Is he still, I don't hear as much from Glenn Beck. I mean, I know he got taken off of the mainstream and he went to his own website and that type of thing. Yeah.
One reason you don't hear from him is because there's been this thing that's happened where conservative media has gone off and become its own thing that is completely insular, that it doesn't touch or pay attention to it. So it used to be Glenn Beck was on CNN for a while, and he was on Fox, and then he decided that actually he should just speak directly to his conservative audience. So he's got a huge fan base. It's like Dinesh D'Souza or Rush Limbaugh. You don't really hear much about Rush Limbaugh, but he has a massive, massive audience. And so that's the scary thing, is that conservative media, like Glenn Beck, has a giant media empire. It's just that if you're outside of conservative media circles, you don't see it. So I'm writing about that and the dangerous effects that has and how we can sort of counteract it. That's the piece that I'm working on today.
I find that interesting because and it goes to the polling that you see. And of course, Biden's winning by huge margins and he's just going to roll over Trump. And it's almost we heard all that stuff in 2016. And I've even had conversations with some conservative people that the conservatives, the Glenn Beck type viewers and followers, they seem to have a way to obfuscate these polls or to not participate in them, or they're kind of under the radar, it seems like.
I think we should be very, very careful. I just wrote a piece on Democratic complacency.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton was so thrilled that she was 5 points ahead in Arizona at one point. And she was so thrilled by that she started campaigning in Arizona, a red state, rather than Wisconsin, a swing state. And that kind of arrogance really is what destroyed the Democrats' chances in 2016. So I've said, we can't be comforted that we just watch the polls, and the polls are going to guide us to victory, because turnout is a huge, huge factor, and Trump has a massive organizing apparatus. The Trump people are out signing up voters. They're out getting their people to commit to actually show up on election day. And unless you're doing that, then, all the polls in the world aren't going to get you over the top, because you actually have to get your voters out. And Republicans are going to try and suppress the Democratic vote and turn out their people. And they're very good at that. So we need to be extremely careful before being comforted by the polls.
Yeah, well, we got to let you go for today. Now, we started off talking about that dual citizenship thing. Do you get to vote in the UK and in the United States, or how's that work?
I have a UK passport, but I don't think I actually get to vote. I've never tried, but I'm pretty sure you have to be have been a resident for some time. And wow. I came here when I was 5 years old, so I do not vote in the UK.
But you're definitely going to vote here, and it sounds like you're definitely going to vote for Biden if it comes down to Biden and Trump. Now, there are people on the left that are saying, no, I'm not going to participate. I even heard an argument where people said, if Trump gets reelected, he might not even make it through a second term, but everybody will be so disenfranchised and so disgusted with his performance in a second term that you'll get a real progressive or somebody from the left to come in and assume the presidency when Trump is finished. If you elect Biden, and because of his age or whatever, and he gets a term or two, it'll just go to his vice president that'll be very much like him, and we'll be stuck in this malaise that we're stuck in, for another decade or longer. And of course, with climate crisis, that simply cannot be tolerated. Where do you come down on that?
I mean, I've heard that argument. I don't accept it. And one reason that I don't accept it is that, I think people underestimate what the damage that Trump could do if he gets reelected, right? This term has been bad, but if he gets reelected, especially if he gets reelected by a significant margin, he is going to escalate his crimes, right? Immigration is going to shut down completely and become kind of explicitly racial. He's going to own the court system. He will definitely get more Supreme Court justices. If Trump gets a second term, there might not be another president after Trump, because he is going to try and make himself president for life. We cannot run the risk. The climate crisis, yes, Joe Biden is inadequate, but Joe Biden is so much better than Donald Trump. Joe Biden has a climate plan. It's an inadequate climate plan. But considering the scale of the emergency, to say that we would spend 4 more years undoing environmental regulations and just having it spiral out of control rather than at least taking some measures to mitigate climate change, I just think it's so completely irresponsible. I think it really underestimates how bad Trump is, and that there is a massive gap between Trump and the Democratic Party. I don't like Biden. My strategy is get Biden in and then challenge him like hell from the left, and primary, I don't know if he'd even run for re-election in 4 years because he's old. So then prep your left candidate for the next election cycle. And I think left organizing is much easier actually under Biden than it is under Trump, who will have federal agents yanking dissidents off the street. And those are very difficult conditions to organize under.
Yeah, it's getting crazy. But that climate crisis thing is definitely the deal breaker, maker, whatever you want to look at it. For me, too, as well. The climate scientists are all saying, we haven't got the time. We cannot do this. If we get 4 years of the orange man fiddling while the planet burns, it could be game over. We just don't have it. This is not politics as normal. Well, we'll let you go, Nathan. Anything here in closing, or maybe just a little bit of a... letting people know how to follow you and the
I got to do the plug,
Yeah.
which is people should subscribe to Current Affairs Magazine. It's a beautiful. We have a beautiful print edition that is we're very, very proud of, and we are online at currentaffairs.org. We have a podcast ourselves at patreon.com/currentaffairs. We have Current Affairs books. My most recent book is Why You Should Be a Socialist, and I have one about Trump coming out that's a reissue of a book that I did about Trump that's sort of updated about the presidency, called American Monstrosity. So lots of current affairs stuff. Follow me on Twitter at Nathan J. Robinson.
There you go. And I would encourage everybody to subscribe to Current Affairs and get that print edition because it's beautiful, and they don't wear you out with it. They don't fill your mailbox with it. It doesn't come out that often that you get sick of it. And Nathan's got this energetic writing style. I read a little bit of it here on the podcast, but I mean, the articles you can get it, you can understand it. He's an outstanding writer, and he's got a great staff, and it's just a beautiful piece of work. That's Current Affairs Magazine, and all that's at currentaffairs.org. Nathan J. Robinson, thanks again for coming on Podcast by George.
George. I'm so glad that I got to come back. It's been too long. I hope we do it again. I love your podcast. And,
I hope it's good news the next time. I hope things are much better.
You're one of my favorite people in left broadcasting, so thanks so much for having me.
Good on you, man. Nathan J. Robinson, he's a guest. He's an old buddy, an old pal. He's a friend now on Podcast by George. And if you like us, follow us on Twitter and Facebook, and we're on iTunes. We've got the audio versions on Spotify and places like that. Subscribe on YouTube, and you'll get each and every episode. That's going to do it. That's all there is. That's another podcast by George.